I'm remaking my best game from scratch. Hey, I'm Marvin, and I make indie games. I made a bunch of games in different genres in the last 3 years, but all of my games are kinda short, and I want to change that. I really want to make a full commercial game that takes 2 to 3 hours to finish. So I tested around and made a few prototypes first. Loose Lines is a Pikmin-like puzzle game where you can place different poles and attach them to each other, and the idea was that energy moves between them and you can control which energy flows in which direction to power some buildings or solve some puzzles. Pants Plants is a mobile farming game where you plant seeds in the morning before going to work or something, and you water them and tend to the crops throughout the day, and in the evening when you come home you can harvest your seeds and sell them, and after that you can buy more or different seeds and continue the loop. I even made some other prototypes, but none of them really clicked. And one of my previous games sometimes popped up in my head. A 3D platformer called Pebble, where you play with rock and move objects through time. I really liked the game, but it only takes 15 to 20 minutes to complete. And I saw potential in that game, and other people liked it as well. And I still had a bunch of ideas for Pebble, but I didn't have the time. Because I made it in university, it was made in 5 to 6 months before I went on to the next project. And since then it was only sitting on my hard drive, waiting to be continued. The game was also made in Unreal Engine, and I switched to Godot recently, but only made 2D projects in Godot. Except for Pigeon Pooper, of course, which is a game where you poop on humanity as a flying pigeon. So I kinda ported the game to Godot, and it went pretty okay, so I tested more and more. And I always found one more thing that I wanted to add. Of course I started with character movement, but after that I needed jumping. For that I needed animations. These looked kinda stiff, so I needed squash and stretch, and this went on and on and on. Until I came to a point and thought, wait, what is happening? I only wanted to test 3D in Godot, and now I'm accidentally developing a prototype for almost a month, and that is in my free time before and after work. So I stopped and thought a lot about it, and came to a decision. I read a lot of books about working efficiently and doing more of what makes you happy. My favorite one is Essentialism, which kind of preaches to say no more often. If it's something you don't want to commit to 100%, you don't say yes, you say no. Also, you should only focus on one thing at a time. I know what I love doing, and I know what I want to be doing. I want to be a successful indie game developer. But I can't be one if I can't make the time for it. So I decided to quit my full-time job and focus most of my energy on this project. Okay, what is Pebble about? Pebble is a game about a rock that can change objects through time. It has some puzzle elements, like the correct order of pressing buttons, the order of collecting crystals and using your crystals to manipulate time, and reversing and advancing objects through time. So you can use them as platforms or go through a path that you couldn't go through before. It had some easy platforming and hard platforming with timing challenges, and the story is told via the environment. I didn't use any text in my game, so there was no font in my game. I tried to do everything only with icons, and it had a simple, minimalistic art style. I had 3 areas in the game: a rock cliff area, a lake with natural elements like grass or lily pads that you can jump onto, and a big volcano. Like I said, the game took only about 15 to 20 minutes, but you can even complete the game in 3 minutes, like I saw in some speedruns. And now I want to remake or continue this game to be 10 or 20 times as long. I've been developing and planning the game for around 3 months now. so I want to talk about the current state. At the beginning I imported the assets from my original game, and I was just playing around how 3D works in Godot. So I implemented simple character movement and the mechanic to jump. I tweaked the jump values till they felt right and watched a few tutorials on that. I quickly wanted to test moving platforms in Godot, because I know in some other engines moving platforms are not quite that simple. But in Godot they seemed pretty okay for what I wanted. So I went on and added some visuals like dust clouds for running, or jumping, or landing on the ground. And I implemented squash and stretch for the character. The amount of squashing and stretching is based on the distance that you fall. So for example, if you just jump from a platform that is 1 meter high, you stretch a little bit, but when you fall from a high place like a tower or something, you will stretch almost infinitely, so it looks a bit funny, but I really like it. And I added the time shifting mechanic, which was the main mechanic in my original game. So I can shift the object between the past and the present, and I can freely stop the objects in between. After that I wanted to add some more features to the character movement. So I played around with a leap mechanic. I was inspired by Mario Odyssey there. In Mario Odyssey you have a dive or a leap mechanic, which is not really a double jump that gets you to a high place, but it gets you a little bit forward. And you can position yourself again. For example, if you jump in one direction and you need to tweak the direction a little bit, you have to press into the direction that you want to go to and press the button for a leap, and you leap into that direction. So you kind of have a little bit of wiggle room for adjusting your jump. And I added a roll mechanic, which kind of looks a bit dumb right now, but I didn't really want to polish the animation for the mechanic, because the mechanic itself is not as polished right now. But the idea is that you can roll around, but only in one direction. So you look in one direction, press the button for rolling, and you roll in that direction and can't move while you're rolling. So I planned this for maybe some enemies in the future that you can roll into and then they get damaged, or some interactables that you have to roll into to activate them, or even just to get around a little bit faster. But of course you have to decide what's more important to you: freely controlling the character and knowing in which direction you always go, or rolling and having the disadvantage of rolling into something and bumping your head, which will of course throw you a little bit back, so you kind of have to position yourself again. But I don't know if I'll keep this feature in. At least I really have to polish this feature, because right now it doesn't really feel that well. I also tested visuals for grass or wind. I followed some tutorials that showed how you can implement grass that sways a little bit in the wind, and I got it working in my game, but I also wanted it to be interactive. So when the character steps into this grass, it should be pushed out a bit from the character, because of course the character is touching the grass. And I found a tutorial for that too, but I couldn't get them both to work with each other. So I had to decide between wind or interactive grass, but a friend who knows a lot more about shaders than me helped me with it, and now it works. I also added some collectibles. In the original game they didn't even do anything, so you just collected them and you didn't even have a counter for them. They were just there for guiding the player in the right direction. And right now they don't really do anything as well. And I thought a bit about the different collectibles that I want and what I want them to accomplish, but I haven't really figured that out. I thought about having cosmetics in the game, so you have different skins or a hat that you can put on, but I don't really know if this would fit the game. I don't think that I will commit to that. I also made a little placeholder enemy for the game. I called him Sidey Spidey because he kind of looks like a spider and moves only to the side. He's not that aggressive, he just moves from A to B and back again. But if you touch him you die, but you can jump onto his head and he transports you a bit. And I thought I could maybe have a small area with spikes where you can't go on, but you can jump on this enemy who transports you over the area of spikes. But let's see if I keep this in, because I don't really see these enemies in the game. But it was fun nevertheless. I began work on the block out for the first level. I didn't want to move in my test world all the time. I wanted to see how the movement of the character feels like in a real level. So I made that for a while. And after that I began implementing rotating platforms, and I made a small system where you can set up how much they rotate and if they should wait for a moment after full rotation or after a cycle, so they can rotate for 90 degrees in an amount of 1 second or something. Then they wait for 2 seconds and rotate again or rotate back. Then began the hard part about this project, because I started with textures. I really procrastinated with this because I hate making textures and I'm not the best at 3D in general. I know a bit about 3D and I made a bunch of 3D games in the past, but it's not one of my strong suits. And I'm not really that fast in the 3D workflow as well. So in pixel art I can make an animation like that, but in 3D you'll have to give me a week or two. And I began with different textures and different texture techniques. I analyzed the Wind Waker's art style, which is the strongest inspiration for the art style that I want in my game, and tested a lot of workflows just to see how fast I am with the method for making the visuals for the game. But I wasn't really into it. I didn't like it a bit. I made a tile block system which behaves a bit like a tile set but in 3D. So I made a small wall and a corner tile, and in Godot I made a little system where you can put in numbers for how big the platform should be, and the platform would create the walls depending on how big it should be. It worked really well, but it didn't look that great. So I was kind of bummed about that and went on. Then I made some more test textures and applied them on some very simple meshes. And even this workflow takes a lot of time for me, even though it's very, very simple. So I didn't have the best time with that. So I went on to some smaller things that I knew I could implement really fast. And that was lights for the crystals and some leaning for the character. So if you rotate the character or you rotate the character is not just pointing towards the camera, but it's slowly rotating to that point and leaning a bit to the left or to the right. And I did the same for running forwards, so a little bit of forward leaning as well. And that is the current state of the game. The next steps would be deciding on a texturing workflow that fits the game and that looks visually appealing. And I want to make a small prototype blockout level that I can give to playtesters, so people other than me can playtest the game and tell me how they like the jumping values and so on. Okay, if you want, you can play the original game on itch.io for free and consider wishlisting my game on Steam. Thanks. See you next time.